Welcome to Notes to My Legal Self. Together, we explore topics of interest to in-house lawyers. We cover career, practice tips, leadership, the future of law, mental health, legal tech, and much, much more. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They're an act of courage. Want to get the most from this conversation? Ask questions, comment, like, follow, say hello. In short, engage. Finally, have fun. In-house legal practice is a serious business, but you don't have to take yourself seriously. Let's begin. Here's your host, Olga Mack.
Well, hello everyone. It's good to see you and welcome back to another live episode of Notes to My Legal Self. We are continuing our series celebrating our new American Bar Association book, Visual Literacy for Lawyers. Yes, we love it. It's incredibly beautiful and it is full of great insights. Today, we're tackling a topic that gets everyone excited and talking. As soon as I posted the episode, I got all kinds of curiosities, requests through my DM. Folks want to know more about it. Folks have opinion about comic contracts and visual consent. That's something that really gets people imagine a different world, have questions, and come thinking what else is possible. So I'm really excited about this conversation. Contract law is built on a simple idea, meeting of the minds. But, let's be really honest. When people are handling lots of text, 20 pages of dense legalese, perhaps even a few columns, 2 or 3, I'm not sure there's a meeting of the minds. Maybe it just depends on your mind, I guess. And at some point, it just becomes a fine print. So we have incredible pioneer results, Robert de Rooy, and my co-host. And we're going to have this conversation that will hopefully give you an opportunity to start thinking, how else those minds can meet. What are the possibilities? There are better ways for the minds to meet.
Yeah, thank you, Olga. This is so funny. Meetings of the mind, and it depends on your mind. But most brain from neuroscience like visuals a lot better than just fine print, especially when it's legalese. So I'm really excited about this conversation. For those who don't know me, I'm Tessa Manuello. I'm one of the co-author of this amazing book, Visual Literacy for Lawyer. I'm also the founder and CEO of Legal Creatives. We all think about merging creativity and law. So today, this episode is really special because when you think about comic contracts, I don't think there is no greater expression of merging creativity and law. So I'm really thrilled to have Robert de Rooy, who has been a pioneer. I think it's been more than a decade already that the first comic contract came out in the world. And Robert is going to tell us everything about it. But before, I want everyone to know that if you want to see the visual for the comic contracts, you can grab a copy of the book's companion guide where you will find inside Robert de Rooy case study with all the illustrations and also the feedback, the context, the results. So head to the book's website, visualiqforlawyers.com, so you can get a copy. It's free. You can download it and get inspired. Now, Robert, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and also what made you think that, okay, we need this contract to be a comic strip.
Hi, Olga and Tessa. Hi, everyone. My name is Robert de Rooy. I'm an attorney in Cape Town, and I've been in private practice since 1997. And so I've always practiced as an outside corporate legal advisor, spending a lot of my time reviewing and drafting contracts. And so, it sometimes feels like you're spending too much time of our precious little time on earth reading some of these long contracts. And so I became interested to make how to make contracts better, more fit for purpose, and more effective in helping people to achieve that relationship that they want to establish. So that caused me to explore a bit. So, when is a contract a good contract? It really started with that question. And so on that journey, I came across some interesting work done by Stuart Macaulay and Ian McNeill. It's called Relational Contract Theory. And then I read some further, and there was work by Fabrice Lumenau about how do you increase or decrease trust in relationships between contracting parties. And then also the work of Helena Harpio and Stefania Passera about using visualization in contracts. And so at the same time, one of my main clients was a large agricultural investment company, and they had a lot of citrus farms with thousands of seasonal workers. And so I started to think, how can I create a contract that is a good contract when you contract with vulnerable people? And so I put all those ideas together and started to send contract clauses to different artists and cartoonists to see how could they interpret those clauses. And eventually I started to believe, from that feedback, that it might be possible to create a fully visual contract. And then when my clients saw what I was busy doing, they offered to pay for me to work with an agency to basically create a contract for their farm workers, and that led to the first comic contract.
I love that. I love. Thank you for sharing that. I actually did not know about that history, so I love how that unfolded. And Robert, let's start with sort of the big picture. Most lawyers assume text and paper really just protects everyone, and the more of it, the better, and the more minds actually have a chance of meeting. But in reality, having legalese creates huge friction, maybe even suspicion, and frankly, power imbalance, because not everyone enjoys, let alone can read legalese. And even if they can, I can read a lot of legalese. Choosing to do that is a completely different thing. Sometimes I do it, and sometimes, frankly, I don't. So why do comic contracts actually work better than text, and when? And is it a solution for everything, or is it better suited for other places? When is visual contract a right tool?
Yeah, so I think we need to just kind of pull that apart a little bit. So firstly, I think using visuals in contracts, like the way that Stefania Passera, for example, uses it, I think it's always good, because you can always use diagrams and timelines and those type of visuals in a contract to improve the understanding of elements of those contracts. And visuals are always more engaging, right? So people are drawn to visuals. So I think there's always a case to be made for using visuals in contracts. But comic contracts, is a more special case. It's not something that you're going to use for shareholders agreements for corporations or merger and acquisitions agreements, etc. Comic contracts, in my view at least, is most best for when you're working with vulnerable people, with people that are either low literacy, or non-native speakers, or when you've got for example, a place where people speak a lot of different languages, for example, and they have to work together, and everyone has to understand things in the same way. And I think that's the kind of context where visual agreements really work better than text. Because, as you said in the beginning, the whole idea of contracts is this meeting of the minds, and unless you communicate it in a way that both minds can actually understand it, there's no meeting of the minds. And so we have this thing called, you've got a power imbalance, but you also have a comprehension imbalance. And visual contracts, cannot solve the power imbalance, but they can certainly alleviate and improve that comprehension imbalance when you're dealing and contracting with vulnerable people.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what I love the most about your work is that it's truly a comic strip. It's not like adding some cute pictures or little comics on the side. The legally binding contract you have produced for that first company, and I think many more after, is the sequential comic art. So many people have a hard time believing it's actually possible in practice to do that. So maybe if we take like a few examples of your choice, I don't know, like payments or duties, or you've talked about this employment agreement, so maybe a performance expectation, or I don't know, sick days or whatever. How do you make those visual stories clear without losing that traditional legal bindingness?
Yeah. So firstly, it's important that people sign a comic contract as the contract. It's not, the visuals aren't there to explain anything. It actually is the contract. So the pictures do the talking. The pictures give the meaning. There is text in the that we use in combination with the pictures, because people aren't, literacy is not a binary thing where you're either literate or not literate. But anyway, so that just to put that in context, it's a visual contract, and it's a binding legal legal contract. So how do we do it? I mean, the fact of the matter is that it's a team effort. It's not just, it's an interdisciplinary effort. I've worked with a project director, we have a script writer, designer, illustrator, and then we also work with our clients, and we work with the people for who we are making the contract. And the first thing that we try and do is we try to create a cast of relatable characters, and it has to resonate with the audience. So whether it's Pacific Islanders that work on farms in Australia, or whether it's people working in coffee plantations in West Africa, or fishermen in Thailand, the cast of characters has to resonate with the audience. They need to be able to see themselves, because a comic contract, the parties are represented by the characters, so they need to see themselves so that they can identify with those characters. And then we try to look at what we are trying to show. And I think a lot of people think, but it's not possible, etc. But you got to just stand back for a minute and understand that everything in a contract is something that you either need to do or not do, because otherwise, if you were describing something that cannot be done, it can't be, you can't comply with it or not comply with it. So in theory, it's always possible to describe everything in a contract, because it has to be done by people, and that can be visualized. So we try and look at that piece of information. We try and break it down into, depending on what it is. But let's say, for example, you're applying for leave, or you've got a certain entitlement to a number of leave days, and you've got to ask for that leave, a certain amount, following a certain process. Well, we break that process down, and we show that process in a step-by-step basis, and we do that, as I said, with the cast of characters that we've already chosen. We first do a rough illustration, then what we call scamping, then we ink it, color, we test it with the users. If we have to change it, we change it, and then finally we kind of polish it, shade it, and then we deliver that our contracts. So it's a process, and everyone contributes, which is very satisfying and interesting, because you really get people come up with ideas. It's on how to best represent what you're trying to communicate.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what about the immediate reaction the workers got when they were handed for the first time this comic contract? What was their reaction? Were they surprised? Did they like it? Was it positive? How do you handle that transition from a legalese to a comic contract? And most importantly, how does it change their relationship from day one?
So I think the first reaction is that comic contracts or the visuals are engaging, right? So visuals are more engaging than text. That's why social media is so visual, etc. So people, they're engaged by the contract. It holds their attention, which is, especially with the type of audiences that we deal with, and that leads to, the induction is faster. People are more focused on what, on the contract. So that's like the immediate reaction. The secondary reaction, I think, is that people they appreciate the fact that the more powerful party actually shows that they care, and I think, and that people then are more willing to trust, and then you're off to a much better start for your relationship. Yeah, that's in a nutshell.
I love it. The visuals in contracts have been kind of happening now for a little while, and every time it comes up, there's this question of, is this a valid contract? Will the court enforce it? And I think with something like you create, which is almost, exclusively pictures, they're not just sort of, as I think was pointed out, not just sort of dabbling at visuals. They're not just cues. They're actual works of art in some ways. If you frame them, they will actually do that function too. You got a functional contract and a work of art all in one. So I'm curious, are these actually valid in court? How courts and legal system view comics contracts? What happens to dispute rates? When you're actually looking at a comics, not just inspired, not just visual cues, not an occasional hold your attention device, not just that, but a full-blown strip.
Yes. Yeah. Look, I mean, our audience they're all lawyers, right? So, or lots, or at least, yeah. So I think, just bear with me for a second, because the question of, is it legal, is it binding? For me, it's the question that everyone asks, and it was the biggest question for me when I was working on this. And so the answer, there's an answer at different levels. Firstly, as lawyers, we know that the minimum requirements for a binding agreement is not very high. Like if you're buying a car, you need to describe the object, you need to describe the price, the price, it has to be determined or determinable, so the minimum content of a valid contract is not very high, and it needs to be in the document. Secondly, pictures, there's a spectrum of pictures. You talk about art and contracts, so you can have a Salvador Dali picture or, a Picasso, and that is, open to everyone's kind of interpretation as to what that represents. Or you can have the safety card in an aeroplane seat, and you take that out, and no one has, everyone understands exactly what to do to get out of the plane together, So we try to stay on the safety card side of visual. So to really explain step by step how the relationship works, what needs to be done to comply with the contract. So yeah, the other thing is that when you're creating a contract, whether it's a text agreement or a visual agreement or a hybrid of the two, if you do it badly, it can be challenged. If you do it well, less so. And courts are filled on a daily basis with people arguing about text agreements. So the fact is that, as I said, this was a big concern. I was very relieved when Professor Camilla Bos Anderson hosted a comic contract conference in Perth in 2017, and she got the then Chief Justice of Australia, Robert French, to basically give us a presentation and an opinion on whether these contracts are enforceable. And he effectively said, well, if you do it well, then he sees no reason why a visual agreement cannot be enforceable. And the other thing to remember is that judges are quite experienced with applying the rules of interpretation. And a lot of judges have already used and interpreted visuals. If you think about building plans that refer to plans, or patents that refer to diagrams and processes. So it's not actually something new in that sense. It's just an application just a different application of those same principles. And then lastly, I was very surprised in December. I got an email from a Russian law professor, Peter Sergeev, who wanted to test whether a comic contract is binding. He's from a university in Smolensk, and he basically created his own comic contract with it was an exchange for a book, a contract around a book or books. And then they had a dispute. I think it was a slightly manufactured dispute. And they presented this dispute to a judge who then wrote a ruling on this contract. And it's the first time, as far as I'm aware, that a comic contract actually ended up in court. And the judge saw no reason why that was not a binding agreement, and they had to deliver the book. So
well, I'm just the use of manufactured in the context of courts is really interesting, especially, let's just face it, in the context of Russia. Is an interesting I'm not sure how generalizable that is. Full disclosure, I'm Ukrainian, so
I think this was anyway, I think that
I do love that attempt, though. I will also, that politics aside, and I'm sorry, I can't hide that politics. The second piece is around, well, Russia and many former Soviet republics and many Eastern European countries are not common law countries. So they're slightly different, right? They're German-based civil law countries. And hence maybe my follow-up question, Robert, do you think that may be the difference in enforcement? Because just curious, or does that make a difference? Which you pursue?
Let me first kind of put my flag in the ground, and that is that all my sympathy lies with the Ukraine. But secondly, I don't think that whether it's codified or common law actually makes such a big difference, because, for example, in South Africa, employment contracts are regulated contracts. So there are laws that stipulate, that these contracts have to have certain minimum content, etc. So, and where those rules apply, we make sure that our visual agreements meet those requirements. And so I think that's just, and we do this in different countries around the world. We often, obviously, try to get some local attorneys, to inform if there are requirements and whether we meet them or not. So, whether it's codified law or common law, I don't think that as a matter of principle determines whether the comic contract or a visual contract is binding or not.
Okay, so you don't think there's going to be a material difference in outcome in either system? I was curious, because that's not a question that I've considered. I was curious how you think about it. Maybe it requires deeper thoughts for both of us.
Yeah, and I want to add to that when you think about comics and the courts, I mean, we talk about this in the book, the ABA book, Visual Literacy for Lawyers, how the court, like the tendencies, the trends, I don't know if we can call trends, because it's pretty, I mean, two things, like what Robert, you've mentioned, courts already, whether it's common law or civil law, they already have to make evaluations and decisions based on many visuals, like you have said, like property, land, construction maps, blueprints, and comics too. When you think about, there's a lot of comics that end up in court because they are a little bit like suspicious, like, I don't know, defamatory or racist or whatever. I mean, I was born in France, and in France we have a bit of a weird sense of humor, and there's this famous journal that always ends up in court because they do like crazy things with the comics. So judge have an ability to interpret what the comics convey. And when it's so, but I think going back to the comics you are producing, they, like what Olga said, they are very functional. I think they're very beautiful. They are relatable as well. And this is how you kind of use the visuals, the comics, to restore dignity. And I think you even started a PhD research on the topic of dignity and comics and visuals and contracting. So moving towards the topic of dignity, I don't know, can you tell us a little bit more about why it matters? What are the benefits? And I'd love to hear a little bit about like the fact that someone is able to independently understand what they are agreeing to. How does it change the entire relationship, the dynamic, and all of that?
Okay. Yeah.
That's a lot. Sorry.
Yeah, no pressure, Robert. No pressure. No pressure. From one easy question to another. No pressure.
But I think you're doing a PhD on the topic, so we want to know more.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think if we are talking geopolitical things, after the Second World War, there was a declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which basically states that people, and following that, the world wars, that people have inherent dignity that should be protected and respected, and that's kind of the cardinal principle, I think, that we all could and should agree to. And so you take that as one data point, and then you take the other data point that we live in market economies. Even most countries in the world live in market. We live in market economies, and we live in a sea of contracts. And so you cannot live without signing contracts. You cannot. You don't have a place to stay. You don't have a job. You don't have any. You can't have a cell phone. You cannot really function in the world if you're not signing contracts. And so the idea, and basically from the reaction of some of the people that when I was present when these comic contracts were shared with them, I just you just saw the appreciation and the humanness that these people did not feel that they were treated like objects. That someone actually cared, that they understood. And taking it back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the word dignity, and dignity, if you interpret according to Immanuel Kant, basically means that people are dignity means that we have to treat people as ends in themselves and not merely as means to an end. In other words, we need to treat people as human beings and not as some type of object. And too often contracts treat people as objects. And that is evidenced by the fact that we, the way we refer to people in contracts, we refer to them as debtors, as mortgagees, as tenants, as whatever. That's one aspect. The fact that we don't care whether they understand it or not means that we are treating them as objects, simply as objects of kind of economic gratification. And it's it's that kind of dissonance between, on the one hand, we've got this such a beautiful principle, and on the other hand, we the contracts, which are so pervasive in our world, does something, does the opposite of supporting that ideal. And so, the idea is simply to say, we lawyers who are custodians of contractual relationships, what can we do to try to make small differences in our contracts, that if you multiply that by all the contracts that we're signing in the world every single day, that could actually strive a little bit towards giving people more dignity, especially when you're dealing with vulnerable people. It costs us nothing. It doesn't, it's not like you have to, you can't, it's difficult to provide people with the kind of economic means to improve their lives, but just having a contract that shows that you respect people as human beings, that you make an effort so that they can understand that they have a little bit of agency within the context of that contract, at least, so that they can abide by the contract. They can, if they can follow the processes, they can understand their rights, and they can assert them if they have to. It's such a small effort that has the potential of at least bringing us a little bit closer to that idea of the fact that we all have dignity. And the other beautiful thing about dignity is that, and I think it was Albert Camus who first said that when if you are affirming and supporting the dignity of a vulnerable person, you're also affirming and supporting your own dignity. So it's something where we all win. And that's the idea that I'm exploring and trying to take further, that we as lawyers actually are in this amazing position to make a difference.
Yeah, I've reflected, quite a few things around dignity and frankly, juxtaposition. We sort of expect object to be either functional or beautiful. And that's actually, when you do that, that does sort of take out the humanness out of it, the dignity out of it, because I tend to think of beauty as actually another virtue, just as justice, and not necessarily in the classic sense, but is something good, but basically uniqueness and what that human or object brings to the table. And I joke, look, if Mr. Duchamp was able to take a urinal and make it a work of art, a functional object becomes a work of art. Why can't we take a contract, which is a functional object, and make it beautiful and infuse it with dignity? And every time I take, for example, a subway ride, say in London, I look at that map of London subway, which is incredibly complicated and actually an abstract work of art and an incredibly functional work of art. Those are not mutually exclusive things. You can be helpful, you can be beautiful, you can have infusion of humanness in you, you can have dignity, and you can be extraordinarily functional in understanding how complex things work. And I think when we sort of try to separate, you're either beautiful or have dignity, or you are functional, but somehow that intersection is narrow, doesn't exist, I think that's when it becomes sort of a binary choice. And I think most lawyers know that when somebody tells you X or Y, the answer is usually an and. You just kind of have to figure out how to make that and works. To me, that's what good lawyering is all about. Anyway, just some thoughts about, because you went into dignity and we started with how, it could be a work of art, but it also could be a functional work of art in the same way as a functional object could be a work of art. And we see it in museums today. And you, I know, recently have introduced the next evolution of the comic contracts, the composite comic contracts. This, digitally combined the comic format with an audio narrative, synchronizing the spoken terms. You're basically making it multimedia works of art. Let's just say functional. I'd like to kind of understand a little bit more about kind of how you're thinking, how does combining audio with visual storytelling push the boundaries of informed consent, and kind of that whole experience. And by the way, we see exactly the same movement in art. That's why you see infinity rooms, for example. That's why you have various installation. It's very much on trend to have viewers experience art, and functionally it makes sense for a contract to be experienced the same way. We are, after all, have many senses, and not everyone is a reader who processes information in legalese. I mean, in fact, that's an outlier portion of the population that does it. Majority of us interact and engage in different ways. Curious, tell us a little bit more about it, and what are you trying to accomplish?
Yeah, thanks. So my first motivation to create these composite contracts or audiovisual contracts was really to try and develop a value proposition for the people who pay us to create contracts, because how can they benefit? And audiovisual contracts, it's digital, right? So it's something that you can communicate digitally, and it's got all the advantages of digitization, which so you can keep a record of your contract, you can see when people have signed, the metadata. So that was really the main reason I was trying to develop that, because I thought if I can create a better value proposition for the paying client, then I can scale the idea of comic contracts further, and I can reach more vulnerable people. That, on top of the fact that, as you alluded to, that not everyone is strong visually to like to read or look at things. Some people are stronger audibly and they like to hear things. So the idea is really to use all the mediums we have to help people, to engage them in the contract, and then to take them through it. And so we created an application which basically takes the visual version of the contract, and we overlay it with the narration of that contract, which obviously you can also do in any language. And we then assist in that in the reading of the contract by synchronizing the narrative to the panel, and also engaging the attention through the kind of zooming and panning and breathing, if you want, on the panels, so that people's attention is engaged throughout. And so it's for all those reasons, and for everything that digitalization offers, that we thought we embarked on that journey to create these composite contracts.
I love that. I can't wait to see the results and feedback and where that leads. And I guess we are coming to the end. I can talk about it for a long time. I think, to me, that very much stretches where I think law should be bending toward including and interacting and engaging and welcoming the opportunity to be part of people's life and to be of service. That's what it means to be of service, is meeting people where they are. But before we wrap up, let's give our audience like a quick takeaway so they can take from this conversation. They may or may not have encountered comic contract in the wild, but they certainly have seen various instructions on the plane that use those principles. So Robert, for legal team that wants to start moving forward with visual consent tomorrow, what is sort of number one practical tip of advice that you can offer?
Number one, find one or two like-minded people and have fun. It's fun. You find solutions, you find new ways of looking at things. Think about who you're working, the audience, and have fun. it's extremely satisfying when you've done something that really just hits the spot. And we do it with comic contracts. We've got our the specific audience, but there are such a diversity of contractual audiences out there, or people that you speak to, or relationships. And it doesn't have to be comic contracts. It can be anything. There's many different ways of doing this. But yeah, try to have fun. Life is short. Would you rather be doing something creative, or would you rather be reading 60-page documents in dense legal text? I know what I would like to do.
Yeah, and again, fun is another thing that doesn't have to be as opposed to functional. You can be an intersection. It could go together. It's just beauty, just like dignity. It could be an and. You don't have to choose. Tessa, what is your takeaway for folks?
Oh, my takeaway, great. Thank you for asking. Well, I would say do not refrain your own imagination and creativity, even as a lawyer or a contract professional. There are so many ways we can reinvent the way we communicate, the way we deliver the service. And now with multimedia and AI, it is absolutely stunning what we can do. Every day on LinkedIn, I find, I found new people in my network that are doing amazing things in the way they deliver the service, whether it's a contract or a legal opinion or just the whole customer experience. So I think it all starts with your own imagination. Pause for a second and think, how can I do this differently, and how can I do this better? And I think this is where the fun starts, when you start, exploring your own creativity. And when you do that with others, it's so much fun. And it actually reminds me of, I think when all the three of us met, I think it was a few years ago when we had an event, like we had a challenge for comic contracts. I don't know if you remember, Robert and Olga.
Yes.
And I think that's how we kind of met, the three of us. And we had those groups of people we put together to brainstorm how they can use the concepts of comics in contracts and explore. And it's just absolutely amazing, because at the end, you may not use exactly this one idea, but you may find another idea. And it's an exciting journey.
Well, thank you both. I completely agree. I guess the only thing I would add to those takeaways is that when you focus to be of service, when you realize that law is here to serve, as opposed to the other way around, that we are serving laws as humans, I think you start looking at it differently. Then all of a sudden, the whole toolbox of things available to you. Yes, sometimes it's words. Yes, sometimes it's a recording. Yes, sometimes it's some visuals. And yes, sometimes it's a comics. I think when you come from a place of service, then you secondarily ask, what are the tools available to you? All of a sudden, there are many tools, and it's not just legalese, and it's not just dance tech. So thank you both for this wonderful, mind-blowing conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, audience, for joining us. To everyone, who've been tuning in for these conversations, and make sure to grab a copy of Visual Literacy for Lawyers. And yes, the companion download guide available on visualiqforlawyers.com. Yes, you can absolutely see examples of Robert's works there. They're available. So I know that they will inspire you to serve your population, your customers, your clients better. Until next time, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you for stopping by. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Notes to My Legal Self. Know someone who'd make a great guest? Let us know. Self-nominations are encouraged. They are an act of courage. Remember, the future of law is bright. Enjoy your in-house practice. It's an adventure of a lifetime. See you soon.